Hey everyone, I want to tell you about my new novel, The Most Dangerous Man, out in June. It is a novel about a regimental reconnaissance company soldier who gets kidnapped while he's on a mission to West Africa. And when he wakes up, he finds that he is now being hunted for sport by a group of tech billionaires through the wilds of West Africa. This book is based on stories that I heard over the years about safari guides taking wealthy clients hunting for poachers on game reserves in Africa. I took that and I took a century-old short story, The Most Dangerous Game, and modernized it. And the product is this book, which I think will feel contemporary and resonate with audiences today. Thank you, and please check it out.
Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Team House. I'm Jack Murphy here with tonight's guest, Steve Lazarus. Steve is a retired FBI agent. He served on counter gang squad, narco, domestic terrorism cases, became a bomb technician, spent some time in Afghanistan, Iraq, many other things that we'll talk about here. He's also an author now. He's the author of detective fiction. The books are Call Me Sonny, Finding Sonny, and the upcoming Killing Sonny. I read Call Me Sonny, the first one, on the plane back from Tokyo the other day. Last week, and I loved it. It's a great down on his luck private eye. It starts off with that kind of classic premise and then goes into a really in-depth plot that this poor guy gets wrapped up in. I thought it was a great book. And Steve, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, man. No, you did a good job with it. You have the knack for it.
Yeah, like I was telling you earlier, it's one of the things that I've been kind of Joe average in a lot of things in my life. I've always been able to write. It's always served me well, whether it was in the military or the bureau. So I thought, well, let's see if I can go ahead and write something that's commercially has some commercial with people. So far, so good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll get into the book in a bit here, but let's start at the beginning, man. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you grew up and what your path was towards federal law enforcement.
Yeah, I was an Air Force brat. Dad was a B-52 pilot. We lived all over the place. I ended up graduating from high school in Northern Virginia. Went off on a football scholarship to East Tennessee State University. That lasted all of about a half a year before I realized I was not college football, at least not Division I AA, they called it at the time, material. So ended up joining the Air Force in 1983 and spent some enlisted time. And there was actually a point at which I'll never forget this. I was a young, I think a 2 or 3 striper or something like that. And a plane comes in, it's a T-37, it's on a cross-country flight, it's a trainer. And it lands at the Air Force base I'm working at, and out pops the student pilot, this lieutenant. And he was a guy I played football with in high school. He was 2 years ahead of me. And it occurred to me, we caught up for a few minutes and everything and gassed his plane, and he went on his way. And it occurred to me that, we came from the same high school, we played football together, we knew each other, and he's flying the plane and I'm gassing it. And that sort of stuck in my craw a little bit. So I real fast went back to school, got my degree, went off to OCS, got my commission. Also went to pilot training, did not do as well as he did. I ended up busting out of the program and ended up in the military police business, or as we called it, security police. Air Force is a great place to fly airplanes. Terrible, terrible place to be a policeman or a military policeman. And so around about 1996, I said, I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to apply to the FBI. And put my paperwork in and actually applied to the FBI and the DEA at the same time. FBI got back to me first, so they got first dibs, and in January of '97, I was off to the FBI Academy.
So being I think they're called security forces now, Air Force security forces. I mean, is that job primarily like gate guards, guarding the airfield, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so when you're an officer, they make you, at least back in those days, something called a shift commander. So in my case, it was kind of a leadership laboratory. As a brand new second lieutenant, I had about 130 people working for me, and they were guys who had everything from guarding the gate to the patrols on base to the investigations on base to the bulk of them was the guys who were securing, in this case at Carswell Air Force Base, the B-52s, and then the nuclear stockpile that went along with them. So it was a great place to learn a little bit of that first level of leadership, leading a whole bunch of people who had kind of a mishmash of responsibilities. But it's I'm not going to lie, it's kind of a miserable existence. It's shift work. It's pretty much underappreciated. You're constantly being told, how much they appreciate you being the guy who supports the mission. And this sort of condescending, left-handed compliment you get from the operators. And I think finally what made me want to do what I wanted to do was, if I was going to be in an organization, I wanted to be the operator in that organization. I wanted to be in the operations side of it, not one of the appreciated support people. So made the decision and took a jump. Back in that time, I had 3 kids and a wife, and at that time, the FBI would not give you a class date until you had your 214 in your hand.
Oh, wow.
So by then, I was a captain. I made some decent money and had 3 kids to support. My wife did not work, and I took that leap of faith and went off to Quantico in January of '97.
So what was the FBI Academy like?
I think if it was the kind of thing, if you could get rid of the fact that every time you took a test, you were testing for your job, because if you failed 2 tests, you were gone. I never had an issue. I was always a good shot. Shooting was not a problem. I was in superb shape, so the PT and the defensive tactics and all that were not a problem. I was just deadly scared of flunking a test, a legal exam or, a communications exam or who knows what, because if you flunked one of those, you were on probation. You flunked 2, you were gone. But I think for most people, if you've ever been through any sort of even a basic training type scenario, just somewhere where you've lived in a barracks and you eat when they tell you, you study when they tell you, you go to bed when they tell you, or if you've ever been to a police academy, I don't think it was that big of a deal. Nobody really freaked out.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, you're there with like all types of different people. Like you came directly from the military, but there's also like a lot of dudes who are accountants, but then also kind of like the grizzled street cops too, work their way up to federal eventually sometimes.
Yeah, that was one of the first humbling moments in my career. Was that very first, you show up on a Sunday. You start class on a Monday, but you show up on a Sunday and you show up in your suit and you meet up in what is going to be your classroom. And everybody stands up. It's this big kind of sort of a tiered classroom. And everybody stands up, starting with the A's all the way back to the Z's, and you tell them who you are and what you did before you got there. And yeah, we had, one of my best buddies there was running a nursing home in Birmingham, Alabama before we got there. But we had dudes, we had one guy was a PhD fellow studying advanced AIDS research at Stanford, before he got there. We had a lady who was a clinical psychologist for the Department of Corrections. We had one former Navy SEAL in my class and 2 SF guys like yourself. And, here I was like, yeah, my name's Steve, and I was a security policeman in the Air Force for the last 11 years. And, maybe I just won't say too much more about myself, but that was kind of humbling. And yeah, we had street cops, we had state troopers. It was everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this is 1997. So if I'm thinking back, this was after Oklahoma City. this is maybe had Columbine happened yet? Maybe not.
Columbine happened in '99. I actually was
Thank
on
you.
at TDY for the FBI when Columbine happened. I was on a TDY training trip up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, when that happened. But it was like we were talking earlier. It was the sort of the height of the militia movement. So
Mhm.
what you had Waco and Ruby Ridge. You had had the end of the Branch Davidians standoff, and all these things were that I don't remember a time from then until now when anti-government sentiment had been as high as it was at that time.
Yeah. I, well, let's jump into kind of, and I guess this is relevant. Where did you get assigned? What was your first job with the Bureau after you graduated the academy?
Yeah, so they have this big deal where you go up in front of the class and you open your envelope, you say, "Hey, my name's Steve, and I came from here, and here's where I think I'm going." And then envelope, please. You open it, you announce it in front of the class where it is you're going. And I got Atlanta, which was actually pretty darn good. I'd sort of covered up my dream sheet. What they do is they give you um, the 56 field offices, and you have to rank them in order from 1 to 56 in terms of 1 being the one you'd like to go to the most and 56 being dead last. And I think I had Atlanta somewhere around 7th. I sort of covered up the Southeast because I was from the Southeast. So I ended up in Atlanta and got there and got assigned to, this is how small the Bureau was comparatively at the time. We had one squad that was domestic terrorism, all international terrorism, and all foreign counterintelligence on one
Wow.
squad.
Which is
That
which is how
is
many
at
guys?
least 7 or 8 squads now in the Atlanta office.
How many guys is a squad about?
I think on our squad, we probably had about 15 people
Yeah, wow,
working.
that's crazy.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, so I was assigned domestic terrorism, and in particular, my job was to see if I couldn't infiltrate a couple of the militias
Mhm.
around around the state that were forming. And the best place to do that, the best way to do that is to get yourself a source who's inside one of them. And the best place to do that is the gun shows. So I made a career out of going to gun shows. My wife was pissed off at me all the time because I spent all my weekends, which is when the gun shows normally are. I spent my weekends at gun shows, just chatting people up, talking to them, seeing how they felt, engaging them in conversation. And I ended up opening a few good sources. And one of them, I'll say his first name now, a guy named Luke, was a guy that I opened up probably in early 1998. I'll say his name because he's since passed. One of the greatest guys I ever met. And he was recruited by what was called at the time the Georgia Civilian Militia to be, right after I opened him as a source, to be their security officer. And I asked him, I said, "Well, tell me about the job description there, Luke. What are you going to be doing?" He said, "Well, my job is to make sure that we keep snitches out of the militia." And I just thought that was poetically beautiful, he, and it ended up that probably about 20% of the people who were in that militia were on somebody's snitch list. They were a source for somebody, whether it was me, whether it was ATF, whether it was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Atlanta
yeah.
Police Department. And Luke ended up helping me make some really good cases, and take down some guys who they had some plots. Like one of them, I was telling you earlier, one of them had a plot to blow up the Buford Dam in at Lake Lanier, and we had a good time. I did that for a couple of years.
I mean, I always think exactly what you said when I think about militias or even like the Klan. I think these groups are completely infiltrated by the feds at this point. And have you ever read the book? There's an older novel called, I think it's called The Man Who Was Thursday,
Mm-mm.
written by this guy Chesterfield, and it takes place in, I guess, the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s, and it's about the police. They recruit this guy to infiltrate an anarchist group. And the hilarious thing about the novel is, as he infiltrates this group of anarchists, It turns out all of them are snitches. They're all working for the cops, and everyone's pointing fingers and stuff. But they're all on the take. This group is sort of like fictitious at the end of the day.
Yeah, they were the worst. The guys, and I'll tell you, you've seen all the memes about Meal Team Six and the
Hmm.
Gravy Seals and what have you. It really did fit these guys fit perfectly into that sort of that memology, if you will.
You're down there in Georgia, some good old boys.
Oh my goodness. And you know, I also worked sources against outlaw biker groups. I also worked sources against some pretty violent street gangs. And pound for pound, the most snitches were to be found in this sort of militia movement. Again, back in the late '90s, the early 2000s. If you went to a meeting, if you looked to your left and looked to your right, at least one of those guys was a snitch.
Can you explain I mean, this is for me a little bit, but also just for some of our younger viewers, what was going on at that time with the militia movement? Why did these groups exist? What was their intentions? Why was it felt that the FBI needed to have a heads up on what they were up to?
Well, I mean, if you go back to things like Waco and Ruby Ridge, these were things, and we could, but I don't think we should, go into what really happened there and just exactly whose mess the FBI was cleaning up in both of those cases. But the government as a whole, whether it was the FBI or ATF or anybody else, took a big black eye with the public, and we were seen, right or wrong, as being sort of an enemy of the people. So it gave rise to some of these guys. And some of these names, maybe your older listeners might know, like John Trockman of the Montana Militia, or Mark Kornke, Mark from Michigan. These guys they were like the first podcasters. We're talking 30 years ago.
On ham
And
radio.
what's that?
On ham radio?
Absolutely. And they had these sort of calls to action where it's time to rise up and to overtake the government. And nobody really had an idea of exactly what the X's and O's looked like in that case. Yeah, absolutely. Let's take over the government. Well, that's kind of a big undertaking, because if you think that you're going to, to quote a fairly famous comedian, if you think you're going to, grab yourself an AR platform and train in the woods for 6 weeks and take over the government, you don't understand how tanks work.
Yeah.
But that was a big thing at these gun shows. People were selling. They were selling gas masks to protect yourself during government gas attacks. There were stories going around about concentration camps. Remember the whole thing about the FEMA concentration camps?
Yep.
From the late '90s and the early 2000s. Everything was a conspiracy, and it was kind of getting steam. And it's all fun and games until a guy like Tim McVeigh gets it in his head that he can exercise a little bit of leaderless resistance and kill 169 people at the Murrah Federal Building as his sort of statement against, F you, Uncle Sam.
Yeah.
And so he started to be seen as sort of a hero of the extreme fringe right. And, we stopped a hell of a lot more of those plots than got through. But as I say, they don't report the safe landings at JFK, just the crashes. So you hear about the Tim McVeighs, you don't really hear about the other ones.
Yeah. I mean, from what I recall I mean, I grew up really in the 90s. I was a teenager, but and I should also preface this. I mean, I don't have any problem with gun shows or gun ownership or anything like that at all. But if you tell us a little bit about the sort of like darker side of the culture that was permeating in the 1990s, the survivalist stuff, the Turner Diaries, some of this like neo-Nazi literature that was getting passed around.
Yeah, well, the Turner Diaries was of course their Bible. That it was a story about a guy who did exactly what it was they wanted to do, who rose up in violent opposition to the United States government, and it was very, very pervasive. Everybody had a better idea about what you could do to attack the government or to create chaos. We were starting to see bigger and bigger bombing plots. We saw people like Eric Rudolph, who created this fictitious organization called the Army of God that never really existed, but people were starting to find ways to violently express their hatred against the United States government. There were biological plots, there were chemical plots, there were explosive plots. And I think all of that, I think if there was something that probably changed that, it was probably 9/11.
Really?
It's not that it brought us together as a country, but it was almost sort of a slap in the face to everybody that, maybe extreme violence against the United States government and her citizens is not the way we want to go. Maybe that's not the way we want to behave as Americans. I'm not saying anybody had any, great moments of enlightenment, but I think for the most part after 9/11, that sort of hatred of all things associated with the government, it started to sort of fall out of vogue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. So I, I, again, I've never seen, and I worked these kinds of things for quite a few years. I know obviously right now we are in as polarizing of times, politically and socially as we've probably ever been in this country. But I will tell you right now, the level of just pure anti-government vitriol and let's solve it in a violent manner, not even close to what there was
Wow.
back in the 90s.
It's wild.
If you're in the market for a new mattress, you've probably seen all the brands out there vying for your attention. Big names, splashy ads, all promising the same thing. But here's the only brand that does it right. It's GhostBed. GhostBed was created and is still run by manufacturing experts with more than 20 years of mattress making experience. They know the craft and they know how to build a bed that actually lasts. So how do they offer premium mattresses for up to 50% off less than the competition? It's not hype, it's smart logistics. As a family-owned company, that means there's no board of investors to answer to. It's just folks working hard, selling mattresses. These are the true manufacturing pros, and the result is an exceptional cooling and comfort at a price that won't keep you up at night. Every GhostBed mattress includes proven cooling materials backed by a 20 to 25 year warranty. You also get a 101 night sleep trial with free returns if the mattress doesn't work for you, and fast free shipping. Most orders arrive in 2 to 5 days. Right now, as a Team House listener, you can get 25% off site-wide for a limited time. You can just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the promo code HOUSE at checkout. That's ghostbed.com/house, promo code HOUSE. Upgrade your sleep with GhostBed, the makers of the coolest beds in the world. Some exclusions apply. See site for details. I want to thank GhostBed so much for continuously supporting us. It's been going on a year almost. So I really appreciate that. I hope you guys, if you're in the market for mattresses or pillows or bedding, check out GhostBed. You can go to ghostbed.com/house and get 25% off right now. Love you.
Tell us more about the Buford dam plot, because I don't know anything about that.
So it was the Georgia Civilian Militia. The head of the Georgia Civilian Militia was this guy named James Troy Diver. And James was he stuck out like a sore thumb in Georgia. A couple of reasons. First of all, he was about 6'6" high. He's a big guy, loud as hell, and the thickest New Jersey accent you have ever heard. I mean, he sounded like he walked off the set of what's that show, Down the Shore or whatever it was, Jersey Shore. Sounded like he walked off that set, and he was just this loud, obnoxious guy, and he took an immediate liking to Luke. He just loved him some Luke. And Jim was also a convicted felon who didn't get the memo that as a convicted felon, he wasn't allowed to have guns anymore. And he was laundering money and guns through our guy, Luke, because Luke, in addition to all the other great things he could do, he was an FFL. So
Oh, shit.
that was especially useful to us. And so Jim came up with an idea at a meeting one night at, I don't know if it was at a Waffle House. And yes, I hate to sort of gender the stereotypes, but yes, a lot of these meetings occurred at Waffle Houses. And Jim brought up the idea. He first floated it as a what if, see all that water over there in Lake Lanier? Yeah. What if all that water was what if that dam wasn't there holding it back? Now, here's the funny thing. Full disclosure, the Buford Dam is an earthen dam. I don't know how much everybody knows about engineering. I got a chance to learn a little bit about it. But there are very few munitions, military munitions, if you drop them on an earthen dam the size of the Buford Dam, would actually cause it to give way. And these guys were talking about getting, a few cases of dynamite, and trying to find a few strategic plots to blow the Buford Dam. And the thing about the plan, the thing about the statutes that talk about terrorist plots and that talk about conspiracies, is it just says there has to be a plot. It doesn't say there has to be a good plot.
Right.
It doesn't say it has to be a well thought out plot. It doesn't say it has to be plausible. It doesn't have to say it doesn't say that it has to work, just that there's a plot. So Jim was talking back and forth, and we caught him up with some other people. I think the guy's name was Don Beauregard out of Florida, in the Southeast States Alliance militia out of Florida. And we ended up working a joint case with I believe it was the Tampa field office, and ended up locking up Jim for about 6 or 7 years. And I think Don Beauregard went to jail for about 6 or 7 years as well. And I think that pretty much beat it out of them. That might have been another thing that I think, in addition to 9/11, I think another thing that sort of just beat these guys down was they started realizing how many snitches there were in the organizations. They started realizing that even if you don't do anything, if you're just planning or if you're just conspiring, we'll still throw your ass in jail for a minimum of 5 years. I think after a while they just realized that the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze anymore. And again, it just kind of died out. And I really think by the mid 2000s, I think it had just sort of died out as a movement.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your CI, Luke. Like, how did he come into their orbit and end up in the militia? And then why did he decide to talk to you?
Yeah, I struck up a conversation with Luke because he had a booth at a gun show. Like I said, he was an FFL. And I just started discussing things with him. And it was the kind of thing where I'd see him at this gun show this weekend. I'd see him at another gun show another weekend. And Luke was one of these guys, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he was always a wannabe cop. And the thing about wannabe cops is they're great sources because they love spending time with actual cops or actual FBI agents or ATF agents or whoever. They just enjoy it. So Luke was one of these guys. I should tell you, he never took a dime from me, other than expenses. If he traveled, for instance, to go to a militia meeting in Alabama, for instance, we'd pay his money. But otherwise, I tried to give him some money every now and then, around Christmas time as just a thank you. And he said, no, it's not why I'm in it. So he was one of these sources who was in it to do the right thing. And he also enjoyed the relationship. And he was approached. I don't know how it was he was approached by Jim, but after I had just given him some loose source sort of assignments, sort of things like, if you know somebody who is a convicted felon who's trying to obtain firearms, or if somebody's story just really sounds fishy with you, or somebody just kind of rubs you the wrong way, or you get an icky feeling, give me a call. Let me look into the guy. And it probably wasn't a few weeks after that, he said, hey, I got this guy approach me and he wants me to be part of his militia. There's about 24 of them. He wants me to go to a meeting. And I said, well, that's fantastic. And we kind of started working it from there. I'll never forget the first meeting I sent him into. I don't know if any of your FBI guests have ever talked about this. I suppose I could talk about it now because, by God, I hope this is an outdated piece of equipment, but I had to hang something on Luke called a Nagra. And a Nagra was a circa, early to late 90s recording device that the FBI used. And it's probably, looking around me for something I could compare it, it's probably about the size of a small paperback book. And it's battery powered, and it literally had a reel-to-reel tape inside of it. And you would jam this down the guy's pants, and then you would run the leads. This was like a wire, like the kind that people would find,
in
mob movies or
in a Scorsese movie,
and get whacked for. And I remember the look of horror on Luke's face as I'm jamming this thing down his pants and taping these leads to his chest. And the people at the FBI would tell you, yeah, but it's studio quality recording. I was like, that's great. We'll hear all of his screams as he's being executed. But Luke started gathering for us, and probably about 6 months in, I think we were ready to take Jim Diver down, and then we found out the ties to the Southeast States Alliance. So we kind of kept working the case. We kept it alive, and eventually we arrested Jim for a variety of weapons charges and the conspiracy and the terrorist plots. And I think they let him plead it down to just the weapons charges because all he got was 5 years, 6 years. But the thing about Luke, and it was probably one of the more humbling things in my FBI career, was, I stayed on with Luke for a while, and after I moved to the drug squad, it's common to turn a source over to somebody else. I turned him over to another agent. He kept producing for years and years. 5, 6 years ago, somebody finds me, I guess, it must have been less than that because I haven't been on Facebook that long. Somebody finds me on Facebook and said, "Are you Steve Lazarus that used to be in the FBI?" Well, real careful about that because I got, people who promised to kill me and all that kind of stuff. And I said, "Yeah, maybe. Who's this?" "Well, this is Luke's daughter. I wanted to let you know he passed away this weekend." And I said, "I'm really sorry to hear that." I said, "I'm just curious. Luke and I haven't had contact in probably 20 years. What made you reach out? Although I'm honored that you did." She said, "Steve, he talked about you and working with you in the Bureau for the rest of his life, even after," he said, "and I know he's working with some other people," he said, "but he talked about the good times and just the way that you treated him, and how good he felt and how much it meant to him to be able to contribute something." And I kind of got a little bit emotional, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It was one of, if not the most humbling things that anybody has ever said to me before, because I didn't see it from that perspective. I saw Luke as, a tool, maybe a little bit of a quasi friend, but to realize that he saw it in that light was so humbling.
Yeah, it meant something to him. Tell us how you intersected with Eric Rudolph.
Okay. Well, if you were in the Atlanta office, you were looking for Eric Rudolph. And that meant you would spend weekends up in Murphy, North Carolina, either beating feet through the woods with the SWAT teams and the dogs or everybody else.
What was he on the lam for?
Oh, yeah. So after the Birmingham bombing, so he had 3 bombings that we can associate with him. That was the Olympic Park bombing, 4 bombings. The Olympic Park bombing, then the Other Side nightclub, which was the gay nightclub, then the Sandy Springs abortion clinic, and then the last one was the abortion clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, where he actually killed, a police officer with this bomb. And that was the one where somebody found his or saw him driving away and got the license plate number. And that's where he went from being what we called an unknown subject, to being Eric Robert Rudolph. We knew who he was at that point. So after a couple of years of bombings, now we knew who he was, and he fled. And he had always told everybody if he ever went on the run from law enforcement, he would get lost in the Nantahala National Forest, which is up there in Murphy, North Carolina area. And he did. He did a damn good job of it for, I think, at least a couple of years. He had some people helping him. He had this George Nordman guy who was helping him, but it became a rotating TDY to go up and spend a week at a time up in Murphy, North Carolina, either beating your feet through the woods, or interviewing people, or manning the command post. And I did that several times. And then, gosh, I don't know the exact day he was caught. I want to say it was sometime around 2000, 2001. Actually at a buddy's house, helping him hang siding on his house. And his wife comes out and says, "They caught Eric Rudolph." And I said, "No kidding." "You got to be kidding me, right?" She said, "No, they caught him. It was up in Murphy." And at that point, my phone went off, and I was told, "Get up to Murphy, North Carolina." Actually, it must have been 1999 because I was still in the terrorism squad. And I was told, "Get up there. We want federal agents. We want you and another agent up there in case he decides to talk. He probably will not, but we still want you to be there in case he decides to talk." So I spent the next probably 36 hours literally sitting in a room on the other side of a one-way mirror, watching Eric Rudolph, pardon me, but take a dump, scratch his nuts, pick his nose, eat his meal, do whatever, and all the time refuse all of our requests to interview him. He lawyered up pretty fast. The next day, I was told that there was no sense for us being there anymore, but they wanted me to go ahead and seize his clothes and swab his hands before we left, on the off chance that there was any sort of a explosive residue left on him, which would have been really odd considering he hadn't lit a bomb off in a couple of years at that point. So I seized his clothes, myself and my partner, John, we seized his clothes, we swabbed his hands, and we're walking out the back of the Murphy, North Carolina police station, might have been the sheriff's office, and there's all these reporters that are being held at bay across the street, I don't know, 100 meters away, something like that, and all these, shutters going off and everything. And the next day, it's a picture of me and my buddy walking out of the Murphy police station out the back of the jail with a paper bag in our hand that marked evidence, and everybody sort of postulating in the news about what that might have been. It was his underwear.
Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was an arrogant guy. I will say that. He was a very arrogant guy. He was one of those guys who I would say remained true and faithful to his cause. I don't know how he's doing now. He's at Supermax out there in Colorado. He's been there for 20 plus years. So, but he never showed any remorse, never really accepted responsibility for anything. The only reason he took a plea was to beat the death penalty. So in the end, he didn't want to die.
They gave him life?
Gave him life, people say life with no parole, but in the federal system, because of the laws that came about in 1994, life means no parole. There is no parole in the federal system.
So he's in that underground prison where they keep like mob bosses and stuff, terrorists and so on.
He's there with Ramsey Youssef. He's there with Terry Nichols. He's there where the Unabomber was. El Chapo, I believe, is out there now. Oh yeah, it's a genuine who's who.
Soon to be occupied by Maduro.
Yeah, exactly. Maduro will probably be out there. So it's a who's who for sure.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that Ted Kaczynski and Timothy McVeigh were kind of boys in prison, which I guess is not totally surprising.
They were like buddies, or
yeah, they were like pals or something.
I guess they might have been. I don't know the extent to which, because the thing about Supermax, and everybody knows this, is it's 23 in a cell, an hour out in the yard. But I guess there is also some open population in Supermax that you can earn your way into over time. I know if you're a guy like a Ted Kaczynski, even if they think that you might be harmless, but if you're super uber famous, the problem is you could be a trophy for somebody else.
Right.
So somebody else might want to get a shot at you and kill you just as a trophy kill. Especially if they're on death row already. And that's another one who's out there is Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the surviving member of the Tsarnaev brothers who bombed the Boston Marathon.
Yeah. We'll get into that. So just to close up this part of your career in domestic terrorism, we've interviewed FBI agents on the show before who have said prosecuting a domestic terrorism case is about the most difficult job at the FBI, at least in some people's opinion. And it sounds like you got some convictions. When you reflect back on that, I mean, what are the difficulties in actually getting a conviction on a domestic terror charge?
Probably the biggest problem, and again, I only worked this for a couple of years, but my sense is that what they're talking about is that you're pursuing a terrorism charge, but you're pursuing it with all of the encumbrances that come with investigating an American citizen. So when you get into the international terrorism charges, now you've got FISAs, you've got tools available to you where you don't have to afford the subject, especially if they're an agent of a foreign power, you don't have to afford them all of the same protections that you have to afford someone who's just, some dude meeting down at the Waffle House with his buddies and discussing about blowing up a prominent landmark or a dam or a courthouse. So I think that's probably what they're talking about.
Yeah, and of course, you guys are trying to be preventative to get them before the act. After the act, you have something you can pin on Kaczynski or McVeigh, but you're trying to get ahead of it, right?
Yeah, and like I said before, they don't report the safe landings at JFK, only the crashes.
Yeah.
So that's all the public gets to hear about. But I can tell you that for every one you hear about, there's dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, that have been stopped or nipped in the bud. And that's the FBI. I remember we were pretty proud of that.
And after your time on domestic terrorism, you got pushed over to narcotics?
I did. I actually asked to go to narcotics. There was a pretty active drug scene in Atlanta at the time, between street gangs and biker gangs, and then just plain normal, everyday, traditional drug dealers. There was a lot. Atlanta was a big transshipment point. So it would come into Miami or would come into Texas. It would get shipped up to Atlanta. It would get broken out, and it would get, Atlanta was kind of a hub in the wheel, and we'd go out from there. We didn't have anything like Miami weight. Miami would have laughed at some of the weight we did. 40 kilos, 50 kilos of coke was a good size hit for us. In Miami, until it got to 100 kilos, they wouldn't even touch it. But we did some good work there. We multi-million-dollar seizures, 40, 50, 60 kilo seizures, and got to learn a whole lot of new techniques, got to learn a whole lot more about surveillance, a whole lot more about wiring people up, just a whole lot more about working sources. It was sort of a broader problem set than the domestic terrorism.
Can you tell us the story about the man with 30 IDs?
Oh, yeah. Quick tip we get, and this guy's coming in with about 100,000 ecstasy tablets into the Atlanta train station. So we find him and we chat him up. We do a field interview with him. We get into his backpack, and there's all the pills. So the source was good, and we arrest him. We take him back to the office. We're talking with him. We said, well, where were you going from there? And at this point, he just gives up the whole thing. He says, look, man, I'm just a mule. I don't want to go to jail for 30 years for this. So yeah, I was meeting my dealer. I was meeting the guy who sent me on this mission. This guy's name is Hunziker, Jim Hunziker. We spent the next, month looking for Jim Hunziker. We could never figure out who he was. And we were knocking on doors. We knew names of girlfriends. We knew names of associates, and they all knew him as Jim Hunziker. And we finally decided Jim Hunziker can't possibly be his name, but we also know that this mule doesn't know his real name. Neither does anybody else who has been around this guy. So it was just an absolute stroke of luck. We found a girlfriend who had introduced him to a psychic, because when we were searching her place, she gave us consent to search her place. And when we searched her place, we found a card, and on it, it had New London, Connecticut, and a date written. And I said, well, what is this? She said, well, he asked for a reading from this psychic. And the psychic, he didn't want to give his name, but the psychic said, well, just tell me where and when he was born, and I'll give him a reading. She said, and I wrote this down. So we thought for a second and thought, well, if this guy really believes in psychics, this is probably his actual place of birth and date of birth. So we queried the New London resident agency of the FBI with this date of birth and said, tell us about all live male dates of birth, or all live males who were born on this date, rather, in New London, Connecticut. And there was one. His guy's name was Mark Allen Abraham. And, oh, by the way, when we ran him with his true date of birth, he was wanted in Fairfax County for, I think, assaulting a narcotics detective during an arrest. He was wanted there. And we got his arrest photo. And we showed it to everybody, said, that's him. So now we knew the guy's real name, but we still didn't know any of his aliases. We didn't find that out until later. So what we did was we set up we asked a little bit, we sort of determined what his pattern of life was as a drug dealer. And he fronted a lot of drugs to a lot of people. He was very trusting, and some people owed him some money. And one guy in particular, who was a little tweaker, whose name was Charlie, I can't remember his last name, but he owed him like $30,000. We figured Mark was, Mark, his actual name, was on the run and could probably use his money. So we arranged to leak a story, and we did, that Charlie was trying to pay off his debt to him, his $30,000, so that he'd be free and clear, because, he didn't want Mark to come after him or something like that. And it worked. And Mark got in touch with Charlie over the phone. And eventually, after about a month of wrangling back and forth, we set up a meeting at the Savoy Hotel in South Beach. And we arrested him when he showed up for that meeting. And it was then that we found out exactly what he had done, because he was tired of running, and he let us know how he had done it. What he had done, he had just taken identities from graveyards, but he was a little bit more sophisticated than that. What he would do was he would find boys who were born in one state but died in another state, so that the birth and the death records couldn't be cross-matched, and died as young men. And then he would, let's say that your name was John Smith and you were born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you died in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. And you died at the age of 8 years old, and you were roughly his age. Well, this is back before we had a lot of internet capability, so there wasn't a whole lot cross-matched. So what he would do is he would write off to Albuquerque and say, hey, I need my birth certificate. I was born there on such and such a date, and I just need that birth certificate. I lost my original. And states' departments of vital statistics send these out all the time. Well, once you have that birth certificate, and he got about 30 of them,
wow,
you have the Genesis document at that point.
Right. You can go get your driver's license and passport, and
now I get everything else. And he had at least 30 identities when we arrested him, and it was actually something that was so impressive that I think I wrote it. I think I wrote it into the second book or the third book. It was one of those things that I said, I've got to include this in the book somehow.
Do you think that would even be possible today with biometrics and computer databases?
I think it's a lot tougher.
Yeah.
If your face has ever been scanned, if your prints have ever been scanned, now we're to the point in DNA where, if your third cousin bought one of those stupid 23andMe kits and enrolled themselves, you're some degree of familial connection that's in the database somewhere too. So yeah, it's really tough. It's not only that, but I mean, think about being an intelligence operative. Think about trying to sneak into countries on fake passports and all that. That stuff is pretty much over.
Yes. No, it absolutely is. And that's it's interesting you mentioned that, because it's something I've been doing some research on. But yeah, the whole idea of non-official cover that the military and the CIA use, like, it's not going to go away, but it's definitely not going to be what it used to be. It's going to be minimized, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it can't. You can't pretend to be three different people anymore. When I go to Abu Dhabi, the first time I went there as a civilian, he looked at me, and the guy in the Candor at the immigration booth, he says, "This is your first time in the UAE, Mr. Lazarus." I said, "No, it's not." And of course, he knew it wasn't, because as soon as my face registered in the facial recognition, the fact that I had been there 3 times as an FBI agent, I'm sure,
Yeah.
popped up on his side of the desk on the screen that I couldn't see. So yeah, you're right. It's a whole new world, and it's presenting a whole new problem set for people who are in that space.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know dudes who did that kind of work, and there's like a whole slew of countries. There's like a list that they can't go through because they went through there on alias in the past. And so you go through on some countries, they might just deport you, and others, you could be in a substantial amount of trouble.
Yes.
So from that point, we're getting into the late 90s, early 2000s. Tell us where you were when 9/11 happened.
I was at Quantico. I was a firearms instructor by then, and I was going to an advanced firearms instructional techniques class. And it was Tuesday morning, of course, and it was whatever time it was. And I'll never forget, there was a guy up there speaking at the podium. And one thing you never saw at Quantico, the classroom is sort of a sacrosanct area. You don't interrupt people when they're in the classroom. You don't, barge in and you just don't interrupt ever. And this guy, Gary, was up there talking. He was giving us a class about who knows what. And somebody walked in and pulled him aside and pulled him out and just left us kind of sitting there. And we thought, oh shit, guy's mom must have just died or something like that.
Right,
Poor fella. I wonder what's going on. He came back about 10 minutes later, and a little bit of the color had drained from his face, and he told us what was going on. And we all just sort of stopped. He said, "Well, I don't really think anyone's going to have their mind on work right now, so let's go." And we basically went and sat in the unit chief's office for the firearms training unit and watched TV. And we were actually sitting there watching it when the first tower fell. So we saw that live, and I think everybody kind of knows what happens from there. But yeah, we were at Quantico when that happened.
And what was sort of like the change in tone? Because I think you mentioned to me earlier, like whatever your FBI career was, now it's going to be something different. The moment you saw that happen on television, you must have known.
Yeah, so we're sitting there that night. There's a place called the Boardroom at the FBI Academy. It's kind of the watering hole. It's the place where, you can go have a couple beers after work, and mostly the students go there, but the cadre goes there as well some. And sitting there just watching the day's events, watching it all on either CNN or Fox News or whatever it was. And the guy next to me turns to me and says, "Yeah, well, so what did you used to do before you came here? In other words, what crimes were you working?" And I said, "Well, I was on the drug squad." And yeah, he called it exactly right. I had spent my last day on the drug squad at that point. When I got back to Atlanta, I was assigned to the airport at that point. We had the world's busiest airport, and we had no permanent presence there. And it was kind of a glaring omission on our part. I mean, JFK, O'Hare, LAX, all the big airports had permanent FBI presences out there, and we didn't.
And that kind of just, again, set the stage for maybe some of the younger folks out there. After 9/11, of course, huge emphasis on airport security, screening, all kinds of debates about the biometric stuff that was coming online, about racial profiling. And it sounds like you were right in the middle, right in the thick of all that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not going to lie, man. The first 6 months I was there was almost exclusively investigating flying while Arab, or flying while, and it's sad, but yeah, flying while having dark skin. And the thing was, people were freaking out, and we would get people who would say these two dudes were talking in Arabic, and I think they were plotting something. I would ask them, "Do you know Arabic?" And they said, no, I don't know Arabic. Well, how would you know if they're plotting anything? Oh, I just got a bad feeling. It was part of this national frenzy that was going on at the time.
Yeah.
And then, so they'd have these two dudes sequestered off to the side, and I'd go talk to them and ask to see their passports, and say, "Okay, Mr. Garcia and Mr. Ramirez, you're free to go. Thank you very much. Sorry you were held up this evening." And we finally started tamping that down a little bit. Part of it was we started letting the airlines know that we weren't going to put up with. There were some absolutely hysterical passengers and hysterical aircrew members who were just freaking out and having panic attacks.
Yeah.
And who were speaking any language but English, or if you had a skin tone any darker than yours or mine, you got caught up in that stuff. It was a bad time for a while.
How do you think the, be it the airlines or law enforcement or the Bureau specifically, began to kind of like drill down away from the panic towards pragmatic policies that were actually effective?
Well, of course, I never operated at the policy level of it, but I think that, we learned from, obviously, the very start of it was we learned from 9/11 itself. We learned that it doesn't take a gun to bring down an airliner. Later on with Richard Reed, we learned that it can take something as simple as a shoe. We learned that we needed to up our explosives game. We also learned that we needed to do a better job of, sorry to use the word, but yeah, absolutely profiling people who present a much clearer danger to civil aviation than others. For a while there, if you recall, right after 9/11, we were taking away nail clippers. We were, roughing up grandmas and, 8-year-olds with casts on their arms. We were making them go for additional screening and, looking through baby diapers and all kind of just absolute nonsense. And I think one of the things we got better at over the years is not only the intelligence and finding out about the plots before they happen. One of those examples would be the printer plot that was disrupted back in, I forget what year it was, 2011, 2012, where they were going to bring down some airliners using explosive laden printers, computer printers.
Was it the printer cartridges, like the old school ones, and the big Xerox machines?
That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah.
That is a lot of what gave rise to part of the FBI's TDAC, the Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center. And that's why in Huntsville, Alabama, right now, there is a portion of that TDAC that all they do is work all day to try to build devices and to try to build explosives that will defeat the technology that we have to identify it. And then once you do that, you build the technology, you build the better technology. And once you do that, you start again, you try to defeat it. There's an entire operation down there that does nothing except try to defeat the defenses that we have in place right now so we can make better defenses.
That's interesting. I didn't know we had like a red team for TSA, like trying to innovate, before the bad guys do. It makes sense though. It makes a lot of sense.
There's a building down there that literally has every sniffer, every X-ray, every magnetometer, and all they do all day long is try to defeat that stuff. And then when they defeat it, they say, "All right, if we defeated it, how do we make it better so we can't defeat it next time?" And then the whole process starts again.
When you were working down there as the airport agent, were there any near misses that you recall?
None. No big plots that I recall. We pretty rapidly went from sort of a lot of the counterterrorism stuff to a lot of the traditional airport crimes. We had people who were trafficking folks. We had thefts. We had a lot of drugs. But we as the airport agents, we didn't work the long, involved, detailed cases against major terrorist organizations because we simply weren't staffed for that. It was myself and one other guy. So we kind of ran all day putting out fires. If there was something in a major case that needed addressing, leads that needed to be run, we did that. I can tell you, not going to name the guy because he was wrongfully accused, but there was a guy who we thought was the guy for Amerithrax, the anthrax case.
Yep.
And I can't tell you how many times I followed him through the Atlanta airport and put him on planes just to make sure he was, going to where he was going to Washington, D.C. and not hopping a flight to Beijing. That was one of the things that we were kind of concerned about. But like I say, not gonna say his name, because it turns out, at least in the official record, that he was not the guy.
He's not the guy they suspect. That dude who was some sort of scientist, right? Who worked with he had the access to it. I'm trying to remember. I watched a documentary about this, but the guy passed away from cancer, and he was never prosecuted.
Correct. Yeah, he's dead. I don't remember if he passed away, or I don't remember if he killed himself. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, something like that.
But yeah, it basically got hung on the dead guy, and I don't mean that tongue in cheek. I mean, I think it probably actually was him, but there was definitely somebody that we liked for it.
Yeah.
And his name did get out in the press, and no sense putting it out there again.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
I followed that dude at least 24 times through the Atlanta airport, making sure he didn't hop a flight to Beijing or Moscow or something like that.
And then after the airport, you got put on the gang squad.
I did. Worked about 2 or 3 years on the gang squad. Started out at first working something called the Black Mafia Family, which I think a lot of people have probably heard of. Demetrius Flannery and Company, aka Meech. Big into the hip hop industry, which puts them squarely in that sort of Atlanta space. Big into huge heavy weights of narcotics and everything. But that we quickly got supplanted in that by, I think it was DEA. It was just one of those things where DEA had the ticket on these guys from the get-go, and it was kind of seen as us almost sort of poaching and trying to explore the Atlanta angle of it. And I think that they ended up working it out of Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. So then I ended up working outlaw biker gangs for a while. And there's gonna be a couple 1%ers out there who are saying, "Hey, asshole, it's not gangs, it's clubs." No, it's gangs. If you're involved in a criminal enterprise, it's a gang. And we didn't investigate anybody for being in a club or for doing charity rides or for doing Make-A-Wish for kids. We investigated people for their criminal gang activity. So I worked that for a number of years, and Atlanta and Georgia was Outlaws territory. So the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, the Black and Whites, didn't really have any pagans or any Hells Angels or too much else there, but that was Outlaws country.
And those are mostly drug cases too, right?
Drugs, some prostitution for what goes on in the clubs, stolen property, a lot of big time thefts and stuff that ends up getting sold at swap meets and bike swap meets and what have you. And that did not turn. We made a few cases. We made a few cases against some guys who, for insurance fraud, for stealing bikes or having their bikes stolen and then reporting them to the insurance companies and what have you. And so a little bit of fraud by wire, a little bit of fraud by mail. But the big cases against the Outlaws came after I had left, and that was in 2007, right when I got back from Iraq. That's when I left the gang squad and went into the bomb program.
Yeah. So tell us about that. How did you become a bomb technician?
So a buddy of mine, who we were brand new agents together, we became pretty good friends, was a bomb technician from early on, and he had risen up to become the bombing coordinator, sort of the senior bomb technician for the Atlanta division. And he asked me if I had ever thought about doing that. And I actually had to have him explain to me what that meant. What is it we do? And he sort of explained what FBI bomb techs do and how we work with military EOD and how we work with other state and local bomb technicians and how we are sort of responsible for certifying bomb squads across the country. And it sounded interesting. And there were also some opportunities at that point in the GWAT to maybe go overseas and use those skill sets overseas. And that sort of appealed to me. So went through a number of tests, putting on the bomb suit and crawling through culverts and putting together a few a few electronic circuits, and showing that I knew my way around a circuit board, and got picked up for it, and ended up in bomb school. And 6 months after I got out of bomb school, I found myself as part of a two-man team exploiting bombing scenes in Afghanistan, in Kabul.
Could you tell us a little bit about, your original question? I mean, what does a bomb tech at the FBI do? You mentioned certifying bomb squads around the country and things like that, but what do they do from an investigative standpoint for the FBI?
Well, you're kind of the lead subject matter expert for anything having to do with explosives. If something blows up, you're the person who's there trying to put these things, and we can talk about that later when we talk about the Boston Marathon bombing. You're sort of the person who's on the scene trying to put this thing back together, determine how did it work, how did it go together, what can we recover from this thing, and how can we attribute that to somebody so that either the military can go shoot them in the face, or law enforcement can go roll them up, or something like that. And so not as much. Yeah, you get in the suit every now and then. You're not going to end up in the suit as much as the local guy who has to, walk down the street to go look at the lunchbox that somebody left behind in the park, and somebody thinks it might be a bomb. Every now and then that'll be the FBI guy. But usually the FBI guy is concerned with explosives investigations, exploiting explosive scenes, things like that. That's really what I ended up doing in Afghanistan. Was you deploy out to smoking holes in the ground. You'd start putting the whole thing back together and start drawing a picture so that people could figure out how this happened, why it happened, and then who we can attribute it to.
So when you got to Afghanistan, what year was that, by the way?
2008. I was in Afghanistan.
And so were you part of like a counter IED task force or something like this? Was that your purview?
Yeah, I'm gonna teach everybody a new term now. It's called a backronym. So a backronym is when you want an acronym, but you want a cool sounding name first. So come up with the name first, and then build the acronym around it. So the acronym here was SEXY, because everybody wants to be sexy, and that's what it said on our t-shirts. Well, SEXY was the Combined Explosives Exploitation Cell. And the idea was simple. There were like 6 of us spread throughout Afghanistan. I was in Kabul, so we were probably about the busiest, next to Kandahar. And it's one FBI bomb technician and one military EOD technician, in this case, a Navy EOD guy. And we called ourselves 2 men in a truck. And we had a little white Toyota Land Cruiser, lightly armored, and we rolled out to bombing scenes. And I mean 2, 3, 4 a week. And we would gather everything from fingerprints off of corpses and severed hands, to DNA, to explosives residue, to shrapnel, to photographs, to you name it. And our job was to prepare these reports and gather evidence such that, again, we could kind of put this thing back together for somebody to see if we could attribute it to someone. And as you're well familiar, from the very beginning of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, you guys were out there rolling up military-age males, and you were enrolling them, right? You probably did some of this in some of these quick capture platforms, these QCPs, where at first you were just kind of capturing fingerprints, right? Or you were swabbing for DNA. Well, all that stuff was just populating this thing that became this immense database.
Was that bats?
What's that?
Bats?
Yeah, bats. The bats is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms something or other system. That's the home side one. The one we used over there was just something that was going into the military database. So on the one side, we got operators like you out there, who were rolling up military-age males and enrolling all their biometrics in these platforms. On the other side, you got that's the big input. The small input is you had bomb technicians like me and these EOD techs who'd go out and you'd find the severed hand of a bomber underneath the car. Well, you'd go ahead and pull the prints off of that and swab for DNA, and you'd submit that. And every now and then, you'd get something that came back, or which was nice, but that guy was dead. What was really nice was when you found bits and pieces of the bomb, usually the underside of the tape, where you could take a latent fingerprint off, and they say, oh, well, that's Abu Markawi al-Zuhab, and he got rolled up in Ramadi back in '03 by 5th Special Forces Group, and he spent some time in Abu Ghraib, and he got released, and his last known location is such and such. And every now and then you get one of those, and that was really super gratifying, because then, you either drop a hellfire on him, or you guys would go shoot him in the face, or he'd get rolled up trying to enter the U.S.
And as far as like conceptually that you're working in this 2-man team, and what I imagine, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that the idea was that, military EOD techs are incredibly skilled. We've interviewed some of them on the show. They know all about how to diffuse and render safe military munitions and improvised munitions and everything else. Was kind of the reason for you being there because you have more of the investigative experience and the ability to collect forensic evidence and process it?
So yeah, I mean, first off, yeah, there's no comparing the skill set. It's actually different skill sets. And I'm going to brag on the Navy here for a minute. I've worked with Air Force, Army, Marines, and Navy EOD. They're all fantastic. The Navy is a cut above. It's just because institutionally, the Navy, the EOD is part of the Navy special warfare community.
Yeah, they have to do it underwater.
It's just something that they take very, very seriously. So we're there for the investigative arm, but also because we've got a knowledge of a lot of the improvised explosives that these guys are mostly focused on military ordnance. We have spent a lot of time learning about the different sorts of improvised explosives that terrorists are using. We spent a lot of time discovering how it is that they build these into different sorts of bombs. Something like a DTMF, a dual tone multi-frequency switch, which is something that a terrorist would use to put inside of a bomb, where you can call the device, and rather than just the phone ringing setting it off, now you have to enter a number of prompts, which then throw a number of switches inside that DTMF and set the device off. We spent a lot of time studying those sorts of things, staying up on the newest technology. So we each brought something to the table. And one of the things that we brought was sort of our currency in the TTPs that the enemy was using on the improvised side. When you get to military munitions, no question about it. We completely defer to the military when it comes to any kind of, to include foreign military munitions, because these guys they're just the experts. No two ways about it.
Can you tell us about any memorable scenes that you guys got called out to, where you had to kind of process the aftermath of an IED bombing?
Yeah, I think probably the worst one, it was September or October of 2009, and 6 Italian guys got whacked on Route White, which I don't know if you were ever in Kabul, was between the airport and Massoud Circle. They were traveling in a 3-ship, and they were acquired by a suicide bomber who was driving a little Toyota Corolla, a white Toyota Corolla, which is sort of the ubiquitous rolling IED vehicle over there. And he rolled right up on one of them and blew it off. I think he killed 6 people that day. And it turns out that 2 of them were people that my partner and I had dinner with.
Oh, man.
A couple of nights, maybe a week before, out at Fob Warehouse, which was the French Fob that a lot of us would go to in order to try to get a good meal. They had a German and a French place out there where we could get some decent food. But we knew 2 of those guys. It was the single worst loss of life for the Italians in the entire war. It was the kind of thing where, for us, us being Americans, it would have been, shitty day. You know, even for the Brits, it would have been, shitty day. But for them, it struck their national consciousness. I mean, they went into like grieving. The whole country went into grieving. They had not experienced that kind of a loss before. And it was again, it was one of those things where you just sort of realize, like, yeah, everybody over here is playing for keeps, man. You probably need to up your game and watch yourself, and watch your six. One of the things that was actually good about it, people used to kid us about, like, dude, you're just out there in some shitty little Toyota Land Cruiser, lightly armored. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody ever came near us. We didn't look like military. We didn't travel in multi-ship formations. We weren't flying a flag of anybody. It wasn't a military vehicle. We never even got approached, and we drove hundreds of kilometers sometimes to go investigate bombing scenes, and without much of a problem at all.
What did you guys conclude from the bombing on the Italians? Were you able to figure out where that originated from?
It was, I don't remember if it was HQ or Taliban, Haqqani or Taliban, but it was just more the same thing. These guys, what they would do is they would put guys out there. They get these bombers, and I don't know what it is people think that these bombers really are, but these bombers were not the highly educated, highly motivated, true to the cause people. They'd get kids who were absolute freaking dirt poor, and they give their family some money to be able to take them off to a camp and train them up. And then they taught them what they had to do. And then before their mission, a lot of times they would even drug them up, especially if they didn't have to be driving. If it was just like walking into somewhere and lighting off a suicide vest, they drugged these guys up. And they were, the people who were committing these bombings, the actual suicide bombers, were nobodies. The people we were after, the ones who were the highest value targets for us, were the ones who were the skilled bomb makers. Because obviously, if we could get rid of them, then the dirt poor kids had nothing to work with. But it was, I don't recall. It was a huge blast. It was TNT. I do remember that, which was notable because a lot of times they were using improvised explosives, but this was actually military grade TNT, and we knew that when we saw the huge black plume of smoke rising into the sky. And so it was probably 400 to 500 pounds, which is just 400 to 500 pounds of TNT is just amazing. It's awesome, and if you're within 100 feet of it, you're probably not walking away.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned to me there were other cases where you guys had policed up like enemy caches and were blowing them up and doing some pretty big detonations.
Yeah, so that was actually my second tour in Afghanistan. I went back in 2011, and they assigned me to the ISAF counter ID section, which I thought was going to kind of suck. And it did a little bit, because I was at this point kind of like working for a staff officer. I was working for an Air Force 06. It was an international cadre. We had Brits, we had a French guy, a German guy, a Portuguese guy, and it was nice. But what was really cool was when we would do these things we called buybacks, and the buyback was really simple. It was ISAF sources who were out there finding who was in possession, usually of captured enemy munitions, and there was so much of that, and rather than allow it to go into the hands of Taliban or Haqqani network bomb makers, we would offer huge bounties on these things, and they would make these deals. We never had part of that. We were never part of the deal making. We were part of the recovery. So a deal would get set up, and we would launch at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd go out to a predetermined location. There was usually a QRF backing us up when we were there. We would inspect what it was that they were giving us. We would inspect and assess that the net explosive weight of what they were giving us was what was agreed upon. Then the changeover of money would take place, and then we would have to drive all these munitions to a pre-designated grid coordinate it somewhere out in the middle of the desert and make it all go away before sunrise. So we would build these shots, and I think the biggest shot we probably did was about 7,000 or 8,000 pounds of net explosive weight that we would set off just out in the middle of the desert and go home and secure in the knowledge that that was 7,000 or 8,000 pounds that didn't make their way into a roadside IED.
Yeah, interesting stories to tell the FBI guys back home. Not too many of them were blowing up 8,000 pounds of demo in a shot.
Yeah, they were. It was a lot of fun. I kind of got in a little bit of trouble, and I don't know if I sent you one of the pictures of it. I don't know if or when it'll get shown. Somebody caught me a little bit by surprise as we were loading some of those into that back of that little same white Toyota Land Cruiser, by the way. Somehow I ended up going from a sexy position to a staff position. I ended up with the same stinking truck, exact same one. And we probably had, 500, 600, 700 pounds of munitions literally just sitting in my back seat. He said, "Hey, Steve." And I turned around, I got this kind of surprised look on my face, and flash goes off. And I said, "Yeah, just make sure nobody gets that." Well, somebody got it, and I got a little bit of a talking to from my superiors back home about using my vehicle to transport those sorts of munitions over, bumpy roads and stuff like that. But that was the job.
It's like
People were certainly doing way, way, way more dangerous stuff than that.
have you ever seen that movie Sorcerer?
I have not.
Oh, it's a classic. It's the guy, they have to transport dynamite that's sweating nitroglycerin across this country in South America on the back of like a deuce and a half truck. It's an awesome movie. Well, what was
Isn't that how one of the Kennedy sons died? One of Jack Kennedy's brothers, wasn't he flying dynamite or something
Serious?
over the Atlantic or over the Pacific somewhere? He was flying dynamite in some plane, and the thing just freaking blew up and blew to smithereens in the middle of the sky.
Yeah, we had FBI agents with us in Afghanistan, and then I remember we had HRT guys with us in Iraq. And here's a little funny story about the FBI in Afghanistan. We were young Rangers. I mean, we were young guys, and the FBI was the agents were teaching us a quick class about searching a detainee. And, this is how you search them. And, you grab the sleeves in case they have a blade that lays flat against there. You feel that in there, all this sort of interesting stuff. And then some of the Rangers were given, their side of the class, like, this is how we search an enemy prisoner. And, one of them is, you come up to the body and the barrel of your rifle's hot because you've been in a firefight. So what you do is you put your weapon on fire, stick the barrel into the guy's eye, and if he flinches, pull the trigger. And the FBI dudes are just like, "Oh my God."
I remember a military guy teaching me one time that you had the guy spread eagle, and the first thing it started with a kick to the nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, when you come up to them and come up to a dead body.
That'd be pretty effective. I don't think I'd be able to fake my way through that.
The sternum rub, the eye tap. Admittedly, the barrel thing in the eye is maybe the most extreme, but and speaking of which, you went over to Baghdad 0506?
I did. That was just prior to getting into the bomb program. It was my first opportunity to sort of go serve overseas, and I was itching to do that. And we had something called the can't remember the name of it now, but basically we were helping the Iraqis put on the war crimes trials for the Saddam regime, and got over there and spent about 6 months there helping their investigators build their case. So we had FBI agents who were teamed with investigators, and we had AUSAs, Assistant United States Attorneys, who were teamed with their prosecutors. So kind of our counterparts, and we were helping them understand, what it was that they were going to have to do to prove something in a court of law, even though their court of law didn't look like any court of law that I'd ever been in before myself. But it was kind of funny. Every one of us, you remember the deck of cards, right?
Yeah.
So Saddam was the ace of spades. If you were big, like, Tariq Aziz, I think he was an ace. Ali Hassan al-Majid, Chemical Ali, he was an ace. And, if you were an ace, king, queen, jack, something like that, you were a pretty big dude. Well, each one of us got assigned somebody on the hot list, so to speak. And if you were on the hot list, we were kind of going through all the bad things that you did and then making sure that we had enough evidence to stand up against you in court. Well, my guy was he was the head of the Ba'ath Party down in, I want to say Nasiriyah, and he was a good friend of Chemical Ali. The guy's name was Abdul Ghani Abdul Ghaffar was my guy's name. And I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. I got a guy that's like in the deck of cards. He's like a three of clubs. So I didn't really have the panache of, what some of the other guys had, but ended up talking to this guy for a while, and he played the game just like everybody else, blame it on the dead guy. And that was sort of their defense mechanism was I was just following orders. And we gave them history lessons on the Nuremberg trials and talked to them about that and explained how that worked out for Hermann Goering and everybody else. And they all got sentenced to death. So day one of the very first trial, which ended up, as we talking earlier, being the only trial for Saddam, it was kind of one of those moments. I found myself sitting in the courtroom 10 feet away from Saddam Hussein, which was pretty cool. Wish I could have taken a photo, but that would have got me in a lot of trouble.
What was Saddam's disposition at that moment?
Arrogant and defiant. And we had to tell, what I was doing there, the marshals were controlling, U.S. Marshals had a contingent over there, and they were controlling all of the movements. They were in charge of making sure that there was order in the court, so to speak, that everybody was moved properly, that nobody got feisty with the judges, nobody, jumped a rail and tried to attack anybody. And they did a fantastic job. And one of the things that they had to continually tell these sort of lower grade soldiers who were watching over Saddam, they'd go to walk over to him and take his arm to, sit him down or something. And he'd turn to them and say, "Don't you dare touch me, I'm your president." They sort of had to re-educate these guys like, no, he's not the president anymore.
Yeah.
He's not the leader. He's not somebody you have to be afraid of. But he was absolutely defiant. He was defiant on the gallows. If you've ever seen the very last moments of his life, right before they snap his neck, he was defiant on the gallows till the very end.
Well, there's something comforting about a leopard that doesn't change his spots. It's that consistency.
Absolutely. You know what? I could probably respect that a little bit more than somebody who became a sniveling coward. And he went to his death like a man. He was a piece of shit of a human being, and his sons were even worse. But he stayed honest till the end. I guess there's some level of respect in there for that.
Yeah. Well, fuck him.
And that too.
Other than that, what was sort of your impression of how the Iraqis were navigating? Like, we're trying to give you this gift of democracy, and we're trying to teach you how to go through this legal process. And it sounds like we did send really good guys, FBI, AUSAs, U.S. Marshals, some really quality people. But Iraq, in fairness to them, the country's in turmoil, if not civil war. And they're trying to stand up some sort of new system of governance. I mean, how is all of this coming together? What was your impression of it?
Well, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, here we come, big dumb America again, like a bull in a china shop saying, congratulations, Iraq, in this case, we bring you democracy. And
right.
What the hell's that? Again, we're trying to impose our system, our way of life on people who, I'm sorry, they're just not ready for it. They were more ready than the Afghans, but not much more ready.
Yeah.
We sat there, and so I got there probably 3 months before the trials started, and they were actually building the courtroom, literally constructing the courtroom. Everything from the podium at which people would speak to the dais along which the judges would all sit. I think there were 4 or 5 judges. And they also built the platforms for the defense and for the prosecution. And there became this ongoing argument about the height of the two platforms for the defense and the prosecution. And no less than 6 times they had to go in and they had to make sure that, and they had to change, literally carpenters going in, ripping up carpet, taking out seats and what have you, to rebuild the platform, because the defense platform could not be the same height or higher than the government's platform. The government platform just had to be, it could be a 1/4 inch, but it had to be that much taller. And that was just, I think, one of sort of the penny ante little bitches and moans and gripes and complaints that not only between the defense and the government, but between the government and the government, and nothing was ever right. And it was just a bunch of unorganized grabassery.
Like they're very caught up in the pageantry of it.
Did you ever read, this will piss some people off. Did you ever read, it was a lieutenant colonel, I think it was his war college papers, Army 05 is his war college papers, called Why Arabs Lose Wars.
Yeah.
Okay, so he talks about the culture, the Arab culture, and the class difference between not the class difference, but the class chasm between officers and NCOs and lower ranking listed soldiers. The inability to delegate, the inability to, allow anybody to make a decision. And that culture, that is, again, why that colonel that wrote that article about why Arabs lose wars, it seeps its way into every part of their life. And it seeped its way into this as well. It's kind of the same thing. Nobody could make a decision. Everybody was blaming everybody else. They got caught up in minutia, and they just couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big differences, and what makes the American military as good as it is that you have this core of NCOs who are professionals, and their whole job is to train soldiers. And so we send them off to Ranger School or whatever the course is, and the whole idea is they come back and they're going to spread these skills within their unit. They're going to teach the young guys all of these things. Whereas in a lot of Arab militaries, it's more like the officer wants to hold on to these skills and keep them to himself, because the more they get spread around, the less need there is for that officer. He wants to keep everyone dependent on him. And that's a major flaw that system has.
Oh yeah, first thing I learned as a second lieutenant, and thank God I actually did go into what I went into, because like I said, 140 people or so on my flight, which is an Air Force platoon, and I was the only officer there. And one of the things I learned from the very get-go was, see all those senior NCOs around, man, if you let them, they'll make you look really good. If you just let them do their job and let them do their thing, they'll make you look like a superstar, man. Just don't get in their way. So that is part of the culture that's really never made its way into the Arab world. And I see it also, I saw it also in the United Arab Emirates when I was back there as a civilian contractor. Again, it's not a class difference, it's a class chasm between the privileged class and what they see. I'll never forget, I was teaching a class over there, and we had these 3 different leadership courses we could teach. One of them was for captains who were trying to ascend to major. Another one was for lieutenants who were trying to become captains. And a third one was for warrant officers who wanted to become lieutenants. And I'll never forget one of the clients told me, this will piss some people off, probably give me PNG from the country too, but whatever. He said, yeah, these warrant officers, Steve, they're nothing, but they're trying to become something. And that told me more about what they thought about. We're talking about warrant officers. We're not talking about buck privates here. We're talking about guys and in some cases women who had a solid 10, 12, 15 years in, who were running significant programs and what have you. And that's the way that their leadership looked at them. I remember one time I used to put a leadership saying on the board every day. And I put the leadership saying on there one day. It was just supposed to stir discussion. And it was during the captains to majors course. And all I put up there was 3 simple words. And you know what it means. Officers eat last, right? And I know what it means. You know what it means. Oh my God, we had a discussion about that for an hour and a half about what exactly does that mean. And I said, people, it's simple. You take care of your people before you take care of yourself. This is not hard. It was hard, trust me.
Yeah, yeah. In a lot of militaries, foreign militaries, the officer class is basically, unfortunately, like a welfare program for the aristocracy. And then for the enlisted, it's not like in America where you get an MOS and you go through your advanced training and learn your job. It's like you join this military and they hand you a shovel and they're like, yeah, dig a ditch for 3 years. And that's it.
Yep. And like I say, I consider myself pretty privileged to have come up in the military that I came up in. And again, being in the career field that I was in, learning, which is an extremely enlisted heavy career field. Officers you're less than 1% of the career field in the security police, security forces, whatever they're calling it nowadays. But it definitely teaches you some life lessons, and it teaches you that, if you can identify your best NCOs and especially your best senior NCOs from the get-go, that's really, you've done most of the heavy lifting at that point.
Yeah. And then tell us about back home. You got called in the aftermath or during the Boston Marathon bombing.
Yeah, that was another one of those things where, I forget where I was. I was at work doing something and phone went off. And I was in Burlington, Vermont at the time. I was working for the resident agency up in there. And all they said was, get to Boston. When you get there, get a hold of this guy because he's scrambling up on the jet right now. And he's going to run the bombing response. It was one of the supervisors that I knew pretty well. And so I got there fairly early that evening. Probably, I think the bombs went off, late morning. I was probably there by about 4:00 in the afternoon. And they put me, we ended up with about probably 30 bomb technicians from across the FBI and also some Massachusetts State and City of Boston and Massachusetts State Police bomb techs, all really super, super guys. We ended up exploiting that scene for the next week and a half. And that's how they put me in charge of Scene 1, which was where the very first bomb went off, which was the finish line itself. And that was where the brother who we initially called Black Hat, we later found out he was Tamerlan Tsarnaev, the older brother, the one who died in the shootout in Watertown about a week later. And we basically just started putting that thing back together. We were talking earlier about what do FBI bomb techs do. Well, we found the parts and pieces of the pressure cooker. We identified the pressure cooker. We found the parts and pieces of the backpack, of the toy cars that the electronic guts were ripped out of to make the switching system for this thing. We found what the explosives were. We found what sort of nails and shrapnel and BBs and pellets they put inside these things to inflict mass damage on the crowd. And as we're getting all this stuff, we're feeding it to investigative teams. So you got an entire investigative team whose job it was to find out, I think they were called Prestige was the name of the pressure cooker, but did nothing but find out everywhere, and I mean everywhere, online and in person, that you could buy a Prestige pressure cooker and start flooding the zone with agents to find out what credit cards were used there, who came here and bought a pressure cooker. And the same thing was done with the explosives. The same thing was done with the backpacks. And then all that sort of came together with all of the video surveillance cameras up and down Boylston Street that they were able to use to track these guys' movement. And eventually, they actually knew the guy's identity for a while and were looking for them. And then finally, the decision was made at a pay grade much, much greater than mine, that it was to our benefit, to the law enforcement community's benefit, to go ahead and release their names, their identities, rather than trying to sneak up on them. Just go ahead and put it out there so that we get the public's help in finding them. And that's eventually what happened.
There's that documentary on Netflix. Have you ever seen it?
I have.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that. I can tell you, when I first got there, I went to both scenes, and the young boy's body, he was all but cut in two by the second bomb, the one that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev planted outside the restaurant, the little cafe there up the street. And that probably, I don't think I ever would have any sympathy for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, rotting away in a prison. I certainly wouldn't have any sympathy for him being executed. But I got to tell you, there's a part of me, I've always been very pro-death penalty, and I still am. I think it serves a purpose. But, his death penalty got overturned, and I think they had to go back to the penalty phase again. His conviction wasn't overturned, but the death penalty was overturned. So I'm not even sure where that is right now. I don't know if they've adjudicated it again yet or not. And people thought I was crazy when I said this, but there's a part of me, because he's a young guy, that wouldn't mind seeing him rot in Supermax for 60 or 70 years until he just dies of natural causes and has to spend, that's hell. Being in that prison is absolute hell. And I almost think like a nice quick needle in the arm just might be too good for the guy. I know it serves sort of the public outrage, the eye for an eye kind of thing, but I think there's some value to somebody like that just rotting and slowly going insane and just turning into an animal.
Yeah, they're never going to let that dude out. Rightly so.
No, he's through.
Yeah. Anything, it sounds like you weren't really involved in like the actual manhunt, but how did it sort of, that whole event sort of wrap up for you?
Oh, actually we were.
Oh, you were? Okay.
We got a call that they had notified the guy, they identified the guy in Watertown. It was when the call came in from the guy who owned the boat that he had holed up in that backyard.
Yeah.
He said, I noticed my cover and my boat is upset. And so we got this call to go up there to Watertown. Now, we were not part of an assaulting team, but every bomb tech was up there to help clear any of the locations that we got to, because these guys, when they were involved in the Watertown shootout, they were tossing more IEDs out of the car.
Yeah.
They were still shooting. We had a car to clear. We had houses to clear. We were literally going house to house and sending, and we had the robots. So they were taking advantage of the fact that we had these robots that we could send into areas instead of risking a man, a SWAT operator, to send them in to clear some of these rooms, because these guys they'd killed an MIT police officer. They had shot at other police officers. They were serious bad dudes. So they were using us for the robots. They were using us to help clear explosive hazards. And I think we were clearing a house probably about 3 or 4 blocks away when they actually identified him and then set up the FBI hostage negotiator, the crisis negotiator, in the nearby bedroom window to sort of talk him out.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the FBI definitely earned their pay through that whole incident. Boston.
Yeah, it was a cool thing to be a part of. Obviously, you wish it didn't happen, but it was definitely a moment in history. I will tell you one thing that was really weird was when they had the shootout in Watertown, and then he went missing. They issued a shelter-in-place order for everybody, and my God, you think of Americans, hell no, I'm not doing that. You don't tell me what to do. No, the streets were empty. Absolutely, it was eerie. We got a call at one point, myself and my partner, to go clear Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's car. And I think there's a picture of this that you might be able to show. It's a screenshot from a TV and I'm actually putting his helmet on him in the bomb suit for him to go down range and breach the back end of this car so he can get this package out of there. And because his mother said he had more bombs, and so we ended up going to, it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, going to across town, probably about 6 miles across town to where his apartment was, and clearing his car. And I just remember driving there. There was nobody in the street.
Wow.
Nobody, not a single person. I'll tell you a funny story. We get there, and HRT is set up on the house, but they don't want to move on the house until we clear the car. So I make contact with the HRT team leader, and we clear the car, and he says, all right, so we're going to try to call him out. He said, do you have a PA on your truck? I said, yeah, absolutely, I do. He says, all right, do me a favor, call him out. I said, all right. And I actually keyed the mic. And it was at this point that I realized I had no idea what this guy's name was. None. I didn't know who he was. I said, I could have said you in the house or what have you. And so I turned to my partner, who was the guy who had gone down and x-rayed the package. We had cleared the package. I said, what's this hump's name? He said, I don't know. So he got his phone out and he Googled, what was going on. And he hands it to me, and he kind of expands it and he hands it to me. And I'm literally, hand to God, I'm like this in the car. I'm like, Dzokar Tsarnaev. It's the FBI. And, calling him out like that, I had no idea what this hump's name was, but he wasn't in there anyway, so it didn't matter. But what was in there was a lot of the explosive that he had used. There was still a lot of that left behind the apartment, so it was a good hit.
I mean, the other weird thing is the mother was an interesting character as well, as I recall. And didn't she start saying the two brothers were caught up in an FBI conspiracy and there's all kinds of crazy stuff she started going on about? I mean, she seemed more radical than they were.
She was, and she refused to believe that they had been radicalized when they went back overseas. She thought they were just good boys. I don't know if everybody realizes this or not. Maybe they watched maybe they watched the documentary. Maybe I forget if it went into it or not. But Dzokar ran over his brother.
Is that how that happened?
Yeah. So they get in this running gun battle with the police up there in Watertown, and at some point, Tamerlan, who's the older brother, who we called Black Hat for a while, he gets separated. He fires at police. He gets shot. Dzokar is trying to run away in the car that they have hijacked from this dude, the one who went and told the police about being carjacked by the Tsarnaev brothers. And in the ensuing confusion, he actually runs his brother over. I mean, kills him straight dead. He probably would have died from the gunshot wounds anyway, but Dzokar absolutely ran his brother over, and then got out of the car and ran and wasn't seen again until he was seen in the boat.
So then the sort of the next step for you in your career, you went to the Render Safe unit.
I did. That was one of the things that happened from that was I think I represented myself pretty well, did a good job, established myself as somebody who could be counted on, who could understand complex things within the bomb world. And about a year later, they came looking for a team leader to go to the Render Safe unit, and I was asked to put in for the job, and I did, and ended up getting it.
Well, what is that job?
So the FBI has something called, I'll start with the big picture. The FBI has something called CERG, which is the Critical Incident Response Group. They're based up in the Quantico area, and this is the FBI's sort of rapid deployment force. It's everything from HRT, which is the hostage rescue team, to the hazardous materials response, to crisis negotiators, hostage negotiators, and there's also a bombing component of it, the counter IED section, and part of that is called the Render Safe unit. The best way I can think of to to describe the Render Safe Unit is the FBI's nuclear bomb squad. The idea being that one of the mantras, whether you're in military or civilian bomb disposal or EOD, the idea is if you can, anytime you're attacking a problem, you want to start remote and stay remote. If we can attack it with a robot, if we can attack it with some sort of a kinetic countercharge, something where we don't have an EOD operator actually putting their hands on this thing and risking their life, then that's the way we prefer to do it. There are circumstances where you cannot do that. And one of them is when the area cannot withstand a detonation. The resulting detonation would be worse than the loss of life of a bomb technician. Well, one of those things is a nuke or a significant chem-bio type device. So the idea is you have to have both military, and there are military components to this as well, and civilian bomb technicians who are specially trained to go put their hands on an extremely complicated device like an improvised nuclear weapon and make it go away and disarm it, make it safe, render it safe. So it's a whole nother level, both for the military and for the civilian bomb side. It's a whole nother level of training. I found myself studying frickin' nuclear physics for 2 years among, you're talking about a guy who, took college algebra in his undergrad, and that was kind of the extent of my math in college. And all of a sudden, I'm taking electrical engineering courses and nuclear engineering courses, and it's just a whole different world. But I spent about 3.5 years doing that.
And I mean, this has got to be like worst case scenario, right? If they need you in this job.
Yeah, so there's the way it works is you got 4 teams at the time. It's vastly different now. I know that they've changed. I don't know exactly how it is, but when I was there were 4 teams: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. 2 teams were on, 2 teams were off. You were on for 3 months, off for 3 months. And if you were on, you were either on a CONUS response, a complete CONUS response, or you were on the NCR response, the National Capital Region response. So the NCR had its own team. If you were on the CONUS response, you had like 2 hours to be able to get down to an offsite airport where we had a pair of 757s that would fly you and your equipment anywhere in the continental, and actually Alaska and Hawaii as well, so anywhere in the United States to address a problem. And if you were in the National Capital Region, you had X number of time to get to a place where we had Black Hawks that would fly you anywhere in the National Capital Region to address a problem. But you were on call, like I said, for 3 months. And when you were not on call, you were in your training cycle. That was also the cycle when you could, take leave or, go do things with your family.
I published a book last year, and one of the chapters is about the military's Greenlight program, the backpack nuke program that we had during the Cold War. I mean, I'm just kind of curious, like, what kind of scenarios did you guys envision? You mentioned maybe an improvised device, or maybe a nation state could, they have these devices as well. I have to think the device is at least going to be the size of like a 55-gallon drum, I would think. And there's probably going to be a security element around it.
Sometimes it depends. One of the things we got really good at, we'll go back to the device itself. Obviously, can't go into too much there. But the 2 broad categories of devices would be something state sponsored that had just gotten either the state itself was trying to introduce it into the United States, or some rogue element had spirited it away from that state. I think probably Pakistan, is the most likely. Pakistan, India is the most likely genesis of something like that. And the other one would be just a completely improvised device. A completely improvised device is a little bit difficult, a little bit more of a far-fetched situation, because first of all, you have to get the visible material, and then also you have to put together a physics package to make this thing go off. And that requires engineering that is really beyond most terrorists' ability to do. Tom Clancy's book notwithstanding, the sum of all fears. So the most likely scenario was probably a nation state device somehow being spirited into the country, like in a shipping container on board a ship would be the most likely scenario. You probably recall that there was a time at which we realized that we weren't inspecting much more than like 1%
Yeah, yeah.
of the containers that came into this country. So we spent a lot of time doing, I spent a lot of time at a Connex storage yard and refurbishment yard outside of Houston, Texas, climbing 5 stacks and 7 stacks and what have you, and learning how to free climb these things and cut my way into a Connex without cutting the rope that was holding me 7 feet off the ground. Um, and you know that was kind of our existence for a while.
Is there anything from that time in your life, in your career, that you know you're like, that's something I have to sleep with at night, that something like that could happen?
It's a low probability. I wouldn't want anybody to go to bed at night thinking there's much of a likelihood of a blinding flash going off somewhere in the heartland. The thing is, the consequences, the likelihood is low, but the consequences
Yeah,
are so
yeah, yeah.
high that you have to have a way to deal with that. You cannot just all of a sudden discover, a nuke in, the State House in Des Moines, Iowa, for instance, and then somebody says, well, I don't know, what the hell do we do with this?
Yeah, drive it out into the middle of the desert.
Exactly. Exactly. Hopefully not even have to move it. But the other question I get is, do we ever have any real worlds that we actually rolled out on? No, there were scares. There'd be things like you'd wrap up a sitting alert for a State of the Union address, and then all of a sudden, one of the sniffer vehicles would go by and catch a dose of radiation off of something that didn't seem quite right, but usually it ended up being something that was explainable.
Yeah, yeah.
So to the best of my knowledge, at least on my watch, there were no close encounters of the nuclear kind that threatened the NCR or the heartland.
If I recall right, you have to scan. You're looking for gamma radiation, right? Because neutrino radiation's like everywhere.
Again, can't go too much into that, but you're looking there. There's all sorts of different kinds of radiation that could indicate whether what part of the bomb you're dealing with, or what type of a bomb you're dealing with. Are you dealing with something that's meant to be an actual produce a nuclear yield, or is it you just trying to
Radiological.
produce some sort of a dirty bomb, or what? So you're actually the whole spectrum, no pun intended, of radiation is well within the search capabilities of both those military teams and the civilian FBI teams that do that job.
That makes sense. And then you retired in 2018.
I did. Got that offer I couldn't refuse.
Well, the offer for Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I was sitting at my desk, and the very same guy who got me into the bomb program called me up and said, "What you doing?" He had retired earlier in the year, and I said, not a whole lot. It was probably about 15 months from being mandatory. And he said, "Well, let me tell you what we got going on in Abu Dhabi. The contract they had doing this training, basically for Abu Dhabi intelligence officers, and training them. And he told me what it paid, and he told me when he had jobs available. I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." I was about ready to be a single guy again anyway, so I figured, what did it matter if I wasn't home all that much? So off I went, and I ended up spending on and off the next 7 years there, and meeting my next wife as well.
Before I get into your post FBI life, there is one question I wanted to ask you about the bureau, and I don't want to push you to go into politics if you don't want to, but I did want to ask you about sort of the turmoil, or what it seems to me on the outside looking in, chaos at the FBI. What do you think about when you look at what's going on in the bureau today?
I think it's a testament why you need serious, experienced people in these jobs. I don't think the guy that's right there is the guy right now. And I don't think that the number 2 guy, Dan Bongino, was the guy either. And I think the difference between them is that Dan Bongino realized that he was in over his head and he got out. And I'll tell your viewers, your listeners, a little something maybe they don't know about the FBI. As the director, you can fake it till you make it till some degree. Some degree. Okay, I think this guy's had some serious missteps. I think he's in over his head. As the deputy director, you can't do that. And the reason is the deputy director of the FBI is the chief operating officer for the organization. He is, in your terms, he's the S3 or the J3. All right. You have to have a knowledge of the deep workings of sensitive cases, how they're investigated, how we get FISAs, how we interact with other agencies. And I'm sorry, but having been a street agent at the Secret Service for a number of years and then a podcaster does not cut that. So my sense is that Dan Bongino probably realized he was in over his head very quickly, said, screw this, I make more as a podcaster, and got out. I still talk with a lot of guys who are in the Bureau. We have, to a degree, gutted our counterterrorism and our counterintelligence capabilities in favor of moving guys into traditional criminal programs. And Kash Patel is on record before he became the director as saying, hey, these guys are cops. When I get there, we're going to clean out the Hoover building. We're going to make them cops again. I'm sorry, they're not cops. They're investigators, and they investigate things that if people knew they were investigating, that they would not sleep at night. So now you have, we've stuck our hand in a hornet's nest over in Iran. And by the way, in principle, I'm in favor of what we're doing over there. I think it's long overdue. But we've angered the world's largest exporter of state-sponsored terrorism. And I mean by far, no one else is even close. And the IRGC is the arm through which they export that terrorism. And I think that we're going to see a beginning of, be it sleeper cells, be it whatever, I think we're going to see non-military pushback from agents that the IRGC has been planting in this country and around the world for years and years. And my fear is that the FBI, as the investigative arm that ought to be posed and poised to prevent that, we've depleted our capability to do that over the last year.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty chaotic to say the least. So let's talk about Abu Dhabi. You're over there on and off for 7 years. What was the position that you were working?
So we were just independent contractors. We were working for a company over there that had a contract with the Emirati intelligence services to provide just a whole range of training for them. Everything from a basic intelligence course to internal and external investigations courses to actually one of the sweeter positions my girlfriend at the time and now my wife and I found ourselves in was teaching leadership to these guys for the last 3 years. And that very, very rewarding doing that. But it's the kind of thing where they're good people, but they don't have the depth and the breadth of experience to be teaching these sorts of things. As a country, they're only 50 years old as a country. So they contracted that out. They early on decided they wanted FBI and CIA and before us NYPD guys to go in and sort of put together a training program to build their capacity. And that's what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. And how did you, I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the leadership problems. How did you feel that they took to that training?
So you have different kinds of people within that organization. The Emirates has a national service requirement, and you can fulfill that national service requirement a lot of different ways. but you got to put I think, a couple of years in or something like that. And so some of the ones who, you had draftees in some of these courses. And obviously they were a little bit different than the ones who were, completely invested in it. So we saw everything from literally dirt poor, in as much as you could be dirt poor and beat an Emirati, but, the poorer farm kids, from up in the northern parts of the country like Ras Al Khaimah, to, children of ambassadors who spoke absolutely perfect fluent English and were Western educated. We had Sandhurst grads in the classes. We had UCLA grads, USC grads, NYU grads in the classes. So it was kind of fascinating to see. Some of them were really, really, really highly on their game, and some of them just, didn't care quite as much, I would say.
And then, you mentioned that you always had, some writing ability. And then at a certain point you decided, or when was it and why did you decide to actually go all the way? You decided to write a novel.
Yeah, so July 21, we were over there. My wife was my girlfriend at the time. She had a contract. I did not have a contract. Mine had just run out. So I was kind of just hanging out, keeping her company.
Dependent.
And you can only go to the gym and the pool so many times during the day at the hotel. So I said, you know what? I had an idea for a book in mind for quite some time. It tracked back to a case that I had worked way back in my career back in 1998, where we arrested this guy for plotting a chem bio attack on the Atlanta subways over the July 4th holiday in 1998. And we got him to court, my partner and I, and that partner was now one of my bosses in the company I was working for. We got him to court, and we're sitting behind him waiting for the judge to come in for his arraignment. And he turns around and he makes this solemn vow that he's going to kill my partner and I and our families when he gets out of jail. So I really never thought much about it. My wife at the time worried about it pretty consistently. I said, don't worry about it. He's locked up. At some point, he made his way all the way out to AdMax in Colorado. And she said, well, what if he could hire a hitman from jail or from prison to attack us? I kind of filed that away. I never really thought about it. Well, eventually I thought, well, what's my book going to be about? It's going to be about a guy who uncovers a murder for hire ring. And he finds out that his name is actually on the list. So it's the book opens with this shadowy figure getting a visit out there in Supermax, as you know, because you read the book, and thank you, by the way. And a lawyer ends up walking away with a list of people that are to go on a hit list. And eventually this kind of down on his luck alcoholic FBI agent who retired from the Atlanta division and got divorced and moved to the Florida Keys and became a private investigator, lands on top of it and figures out what's going on. And in so doing, he finds out that his is the last name on the list. So I just started writing, and I wrote the first chapter, and I handed it to my girlfriend, now my wife at the time, and I said, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. She said, I like where you're going, but it kind of sucks. And she broke it down for me, the parts of it that weren't all that good. And I changed it and immediately changed kind of the way that I wrote from that standpoint on. She told me about where things were too wordy, where I was, leaving the story. She was kind of my first editor, if you will, but she got me started on a more effective way of writing. And I finished it. It took me about a year and a half to finish the book. Actually, it took me about a year to finish the book, and it took me about 15 months to find a publisher after that.
Well, first off, I love the genre of, the down and out former cop turned private detective. I love the noir films and all of that stuff. And your book is sort of like a modern take on that. But I also thought where you were very strong and very interesting in the book was in describing sort of the criminal underworld. And the way you describe it feels real and plausible. And it is the sort of thing that'll keep you awake at night. Like, is this real?
Yeah, so what I relied on was the cultures that I was exposed to when I was working these things. Everybody I worked with was, or I ran cases against, yeah, they were a shitbag. They were doing bad things. And that's the reason that I was running cases against them. But each one of them had some sort of a culture, whether it was not ratting, whether it was brotherhood, whether it was whatever it was, that I was able to draw from and sort of use it to illustrate the characters in this book. I think the people in the book, I think I drew more from like sort of a mafia culture than any, sort of an omerta, and a little bit of the few things that I learned about the dark web and about how people navigate their way through the dark web. I was able to put that into play as well. The other thing I tried to do, and the sort of balancing line, and my wife caught me doing this a couple of times too, and she reeled me in when she would see this, was she said, okay, I understand you're trying to make the reader understand how we do things in the FBI, but don't turn this into a tutorial. And so I kind of reeled that back a few times. And then my editor, once I found a publisher, my editor reeled that in a little bit as well. I love Tom Clancy, but my God, the man can go on and on and on sometimes, and it becomes a tutorial, it becomes a field manual. Nobody wants to read a field manual.
Yeah. In the modern era too, I think, when Tom Clancy was writing those books and some of the nuances of the military, I mean, the only way you would know those things is if you were in the military or you did a bunch of research and books. Nowadays, a lot of that stuff is right on Wikipedia. It's not so mysterious anymore.
Yeah, you have to wonder about some of his sources and how much risk they put themselves into telling them some of the things that he used in his books.
Yeah, no, he definitely had some great sources that he drew upon. I think you did a great job fleshing out, the villains in Call Me Sonny, and the whole part where the guy, you're talking about how the guy gets professionalized in prison, how prison is sort of like a finishing school for criminals. And then he gets out and he starts becoming much better at crime. And the whole narrative about how he begins laundering money through the guy that owns the used car lot. It's like, this is awesome stuff. Like, I love to learn how that kind of thing works.
Yeah, I try to provide, sort of a backstory with theirs. I find that if you can keep from doing it in such a way that you're writing a field manual or a tutorial or something like that, if you can find that sort of sweet spot where there's just enough backstory to make people kind of understand or have a little bit of a deeper connection, a deeper association with the people. And actually, the thing that you talked about, you were talking about like the very beginning of part 2 of the book, and I won't give too many spoilers, but the helicopter escape scene from the prison. That actually was not in the first cut of the book. The editor came back to me, and for your listeners, the bad guy here is Travis Conway. The editor came back to me and said, hey, I need a chapter where you sell me on the fact, or sell me on the reason that Travis Conway is this belt and suspenders kind of guy. So I thought about Reidsville Prison, where I had done some cases in South Georgia. And I thought about a couple of cases where people have actually been snatched by helicopters out of prisons, and I went ahead and wrote that scene, and it just got gorier and better and more fun to write as I went along, and it was great, man. I really enjoyed that. Like at the end, I said, you know what, I really should have the rotor cut this guy in half, and
it's a clusterfuck.
It was the most fun chapter I wrote in the entire book.
A clusterfuck of an escape attempt. Yeah, no, it's memorable.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And there's a lot of players in this book. The protagonist has like multiple teams of hitmen after him at various points. Some really colorful characters come in and out. There's some former special ops guy turned assassin looking for him. Um, and then there's a huge, I won't give it away, there's a huge twist at the end of the book where you're like, holy shit. Do you want to give like a thumbnail sketch or what the back cover synopsis is for the second book that I haven't read yet?
Yeah, and I think you're going to like it because you're right. He is a special ops guy. His fifth Special Forces group, as a matter of fact, and we get to find out about the mission that he went on, where he became Robert Charles Petty. I actually sat down with one of your former colleagues for about 3 hours and had him walk me through a like an A-team type operation, so that I could write this thing and write it properly and give it its proper its proper due in the book. So in the second book, at the end of the first book, all these guys who've been operating sort of with impunity, it gets rough for them for a while, but then they've managed to work it out by killing somebody who could have given up the network. But at the end of it, they're back in business, and you're kind of left feeling like, well, shit, the bad guys got away with it. So I picked right up there in the next book, and it's called Finding Sonny. So we're going to find out a lot more about Sonny. We're going to find who is sort of the ultimate bad guy in this book. We're going to find out a lot more about Vincent Camara, aka Robert Charles Petty, as the state of Florida knows him now, as he sits in his jail cell. And we're gonna introduce a few more characters. We're also gonna explain that big matzo ball I left hanging out there at the end of the first book.
Right.
Yeah. I'm gonna explain that one as well. And I could have gone two ways with that one, but I after long talks with my editor, I decided we would go in a definite one particular way.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I'm definitely going to read Finding Sonny later this year. This podcast keeps me pretty busy with reading books. I had to read one book for our last one with the human trafficking detective. Read that on the way to Japan, and then read your book on the way back. So this job keeps me pretty busy reading. But I will get to it. And you said you're working on the draft for book 3.
Yeah. So midway through the first book, I said, I wonder if I want to close this one out at the end of it, or if I want a sequel. And then midway through writing that, I said, I wonder if this is trilogy material. And again, I got on the phone with the editor, and we hashed out some ideas for it. And we said, yeah, this is definitely trilogy material. But I think with the name of the third book, I think, yeah, we know Sonny dies in the end of this one. But I think I've managed to put enough twists and turns in there again to where it's still, even though he's a goner at the end of it, it's still going to be pretty interesting.
Do you have any plans for the future as far as do you think you're going to keep writing the same protagonist, or do you think you're going to start a different series, or what do you think?
Well, I've got an end figured out to this book that I'm writing right now that is going to take us deeper into Bryce Chandler. So the Bryce Chandler series, the Bryce Chandler mystery or thriller series, is going to continue on. He's going to be my, Hieronymus Bosch, if you will. He's going to be my protagonist because I think he's interesting. I think he's got a lot to give to the series. But I'm going to go in a completely different direction with him at the end of this next book, and there's going to be something really, really out of character that sort of blows up at the end of the third book.
All right.
It's going to take you back. It's going to take you back 20 years to some really, really bad shit that happened when he was an FBI agent in Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, you unpack some of it in the first book where, the previous episode we just did with the detective that investigated human trafficking cases, about the personal toll that this job takes on you. And, you unpack quite a bit of that in the first book about why this FBI guy is a former FBI guy, why he struggled with alcoholism, why he's divorced, why he's dealing with all this stuff.
Yeah, the whole thing in the trailer in Barnesville, that comes up again in book 2, and and is finally dealt with and reconciled in book 3. So I that was not just and again, that was something that happened, in real life. Won't ruin it for the listeners, but just think the most horrific shit you can possibly think of, and this was it. But that comes up again in book 2 and book 3.
Yeah. So Call Me Sonny and Finding Sonny are both out. Where can people go to find them?
Easiest place is where everybody buys their books, Amazon. They're also on barnesandnoble.com. Most of the retail booksellers out there can get them, but the easiest place is just, Amazon. I figure if Stephen King sells 80% of his books on Amazon, that's good enough for me as well.
Yeah.
So.
And where can people go to find you? Do you have like a website or anything else people can, social media?
I do. As part of trying to market out my books, I pimped myself out on social media pretty hard, which is pretty funny. My kids laugh at it to this day because I always was one of those old guys that said I'd never get into social media, and now 815,000 followers later on Instagram as it's Steve Lazarus Books. I'm on TikTok as Steve Lazarus Books, Facebook, Steve Lazarus Books, or Steve Lazarus Author, or something like that. But I don't do X. I'm probably going to start substacking here before too long. And also I've got my website, stevelazarusbooks.com.
Cool. Steve, thanks so much for doing this interview and sharing your life experience with us, telling us about your books. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we get going tonight?
No, I really thank you for having me on. It's fun to share the story.
Yeah.
I do hope that I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I think the FBI is a doomed organization. I think we need a tweak, not a redo. I think that if we get the right serious people into the Bureau sooner rather than later, and we stop all this political buffoonery and this revenge tour sort of stuff, firing people because they covered a lead 6 years ago. I think if we can get back to being what the Bureau deserves, what the American people deserve the Bureau to be, and that being a guardian of our freedom and our safety and our way of life, I think that's in everybody's best interest. So we need serious people to do that. So that's going to require a shift. But I don't think it's by no means out of the realm of possibility. We can do this.
Talking to former agents in the past, I remember how furious some of them were about Comey going down on the Hill to testify. And they felt that it politicized the Bureau. And they'd say, as investigators, as FBI agents, we try so hard to be nonpartisan and apolitical. And we just follow the evidence and we follow the facts. We're cops, that's what we do. And they hated to see the Bureau get dragged into, a political circus, frankly. And I mean, look at where we are today. It's like, not
Comey
good.
fucked up. There's no question about it. I don't know if he's ever owned it to this day or not, but every FBI agent I know, my wife and myself included, were saying, what do you mean we're not charging Hillary Clinton? We don't charge anybody with anything. We investigate crimes. We send our findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They charge people. To this day, I think that maybe he was just told he was going to eat the pill for that one. He was going to stand up and be the one to say it.
It should have been DOJ, not.
What's that?
It should have been DOJ down there doing that.
It should have been. I think all that came in the kerfuffle after the shit show after that meeting between, who was it, Bill Clinton and the Attorney General and the tarmac there.
Yeah.
Deciding not to charge his wife, and it's not even our decision to make. But every FBI agent I know, and Comey's a nice guy. I mean, I don't think he's a bad human being, but to me, the sort of mold of an FBI director that I'm looking for is more the Louis Freeh, quiet, professional, when he does talk, it means something, and people lean in to listen because, he's established himself, and he's also the only former agent who became a director. So there's that as well. But that to me is more the mold that we need to get back into, not grandstanding politicians, not, people who won't get off of a frickin' G5 because you're waiting for someone to bring you an FBI raid vest and you want to cosplay this afternoon at a presser, but serious man or woman who will make the FBI what it needs to be again.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying this, I remember we had Danny Coulson on the show a couple times. Serious G-man,
Yeah, G-man's G-man.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you again for doing this interview. We will have links down in the description for people watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, links to Steve's books and his website. You guys can go and check all of that out. Again, I really recommend Call Me Sonny, the first book in the series. It was really good. And for everyone out there, we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the High Side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox and it will have, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com /join.